we got to do what Gus would have wanted. And he said to me, Mama, you gotta start to get involved with what's gonna happen with Gus's music. There's a lot of music, and I'm gonna be a very busy mom because I gotta go around and make it happen the right way.
Whether it's 2 days, 2 years, or 2 decades after their death, hip-hop has a long-standing tradition of honoring rappers who've passed on and keeping their name alive through songs, interviews, and murals around the world. Seen as a way to celebrate their contributions to the game rather than define them by the cause of their death, it's this commitment to paying homage that means younger fans are made aware of the Tupacs and the Biggies long before diving into their back catalog. However, when record companies and the execs of their estates begin to artificially add new projects to their discography without any direction from the fallen artists themselves, things can turn sour. In a world where the news of a rapper's death is both worldwide news and depressingly familiar, we now have a clear template for what takes place in the aftermath. After the flood of Instagram tributes and the tearful comments, most rappers experience a boom in streaming like nothing that any living artist could ever hope for. When Nipsey Hussle died, his streams were up 500% one day after his death. For XXXTentacion, that rise was 1,000%, and while in the year following his passing in 2019, Juice WRLD would become the most streamed artist in the US. Faced with an artist that's more invested in the late artist than ever, and hard drives full of unreleased music, Jay Stone's remarks about a potential new project from the late Nipsey Hussle are completely normalized.
It's so much music this did, bro, like you wouldn't even imagine, bro. It's that I haven't even heard. When I thought I heard everything, it's gonna definitely be another Nip album. But
you gotta take time with that though,
it's all
man.
money in, so we ain't gonna put out nothing Mickey or do it just
exactly.
Because.
Between the sales that artists command after they're gone and Jay Stone's hints towards posthumous projects being released just because, the problem of trying to recapture the essence of someone that's now gone in album form begins to emerge. As hip-hop gets more and more accustomed to seeing both rising stars and established artists pass away, the fine line between an authentic tribute and a cash grab still hasn't been clearly defined. Flooded with grief at a rate that it's never been experienced before, the fact that posthumous albums have become so common means that when a rapper dies, the notion that we haven't heard the last of them is a grim certainty. For a recent example, take King Von's Camp's response to his tragic death in November of last year. To celebrate Von's artistry, vision, and the immense love that he had for his fans, we will be continuing his rollout of Welcome to O-Block, while working to share unreleased music and interviews that he's devoted his creativity into completing. Von had also been working on new endeavors that we will be announcing down the line. So, rather than simply saying that they'd carry out what he'd set in stone before he died, there were already plans for something new scheduled before the dust had even settled. Although the circumstances surrounding his death were mysterious, it's also telling that it took a few days after MF Doom's wife, Jasmine, alerted the world to his passing before Peanut Butter Wolf felt the need to comment on the prospect of releasing the sequel to the iconic Mad Villainy. In both cases, the community's response was mixed, as when you're crafting a posthumous project based on what you'd envision the artist would want, you're asking the fans to trust you to have good intentions. Thankfully, King Von had the foresight to own his masters, and thus all the proceeds from his debut project and whatever comes afterwards will go directly to his family. As an independent trailblazer, it's likely that Doom had a similar situation. While in other cases, there's a sense that posthumous records present a hollowed out shell of who the rapper was in favor of making money off their name. In this lane, we find a delicate situation that surrounds Juice WRLD's back catalog, where things began with the purpose before heading down a darkened path. Although he was undeniably popular at the time of his death, When his first posthumous project, Legends Never Die, dropped, it did so with first week sales of over 500,000. To put that into context, this is almost 400,000 more units than Death Race for Love shifted in the same time frame. Numbers aside, Legends Never Die was a well-received project that, while featuring more guest appearances than any Juice project previously had, hit the same notes that his emotionally scarred music always aimed for. But where some fans would have been satisfied to see his massive back catalog of music laid to rest on this positive note, that record wasn't intended as the last goodbye, but the first to come off the assembly line. Just 2 months after the record's release, Juice's label boss at Grade A Productions, Lil Peep, already claimed that Juice's next album was in the works. In fact, he casually rolled it off alongside other new projects he was working on, as if a record from Beyond the Grave was just another release.
Say Leroy dropping in 3 weeks. Juice WRLD next album crazy.
In Lil Bibby's offhand approach to yet another Juice WRLD project being greenlit without his say-so, we entered a point where things get a little sinister. Namely, when rappers' voice and legacies are used in the fast and loose fashion that the iconic Tupac was unwillingly subjected to. 24 years after his death, Tupac's discography features more records made after his death than he made while he was breathing. And while eyewitnesses did say that Tupac stockpiled songs as if he knew the clock was ticking, the careless nature of how these projects were handled meant that they seemed more and more empty. From Eminem making Pac and sworn enemy Biggie peacefully coexist on Runnin', Dying to Live, and manipulating his voice to shout out G-Unit on Loyal to the Game, to Corrupt's verse being replaced in favor of Trick Daddy on Better Days, Still Ballin', to say that the agendas of others were placed ahead of Pac's artistic vision would be an understatement. Now that Pac's tomb has gone undisturbed for many years, a more modern example of misappropriating a late rapper's leftovers comes from XXXTentacion's camp. Seemingly working off just a skeleton of ideas rather than finished music, both 2018 Skins and 2019 Bad Vibes Forever received scathing views from critics and his own devoted fans alike. But aside from the lackluster music itself, the tipping point really came when his long dormant Instagram account went live to promote X and Ichabod Vane's Chase Glass Shards. A song that was widely hated by X's audience anyway, the public's perception of the track only worsened when it was revealed that Cleopatra Bernard, X's mother, was Ichabod's manager, and appeared to be using her son's legacy as a gateway to a career in the industry. Granted, this wouldn't help her get over the heartache of losing a son, but it did nothing to dismiss the idea that X's team will ultimately do anything to posthumously profit off of him, including displaying the car that he died in as a grim art exhibit. Through the carelessness of both Pac and X's estates, it's clear to see why posthumous projects are received with such suspicion from their fans. But they can be done tastefully in a way that's focused on achieving their unreached goals rather than lining the pockets of others. After XXXTentacion and Lil Peep's collab of Falling Down was met with anger and confusion by his friends and fans due to the late Peep's distaste for X, his mother stepped in to oversee Come Over When You're Sober Part 2. On top of pleading with producers not to chop it up and put features on it unless it's somehow clear to you that that's okay with them, she then detailed her outlook on future Peep releases during an interview with Genius.
We got to do what Gus would have wanted. And he said to me, Mama, you gotta start to get involved with what's gonna happen with Gus's music. There's a lot of music, and I'm gonna be a very busy mom because I gotta go around and make it happen the right way.
In other scenarios, rather than someone rummaging through their voice notes and making a collage to put together songs, they were basically left with a finished project that they'd hoped to see the light of day. Creating a situation where sequencing and packaging is more what's required versus building a replica of their sound, one clear-cut and at times heartbreaking version of this would be Mac Miller's Circles. composed the music that was almost completely finished. Famed composer John Bryan's involvement in both the Swimming and Circles eras of Mac's career suggests that the material we got was actually meant for the public's ears and wasn't by any means leftovers.
He comes in and he plays 5 or 6 things the first night, and I was floored because there was stuff that ended up on both albums. I already had plans about the future involving him. So I had a pile of instruments put aside to give him. I was more excited about him than I've been in quite some time.
With John being able to tell the stories of good news being made in studio with Mac, we see a case study of what we'd want all posthumous albums to be like. And honestly, there are times where you see people simply coming together to complete an artist's vision without wanting any reward or praise for it. Although he's often seen as a troll in modern hip-hop circles, 50 Cent presented an admirable mindset of how to get involved in a posthumous project when it came time for Pop Smoke's Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon project. Having previously criticized Diddy for how he handled Biggie's name, 50 decided to help craft the drill icon's debut album. And despite being renowned as both hard-headed and a keen businessman, 50 not only put his own judgments aside for the good of the project, but didn't accept any money either.
The parties involved that aren't necessarily doing it for the same reasons I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Meaning they're invested in financially. I'm doing it only based on the culture and what I would in my relationship with Pop Smoke. That's it. I wouldn't be working with these people. I don't have to develop the relationship to do something that I would like to do for Pop Smoke. As soon as I notice the record is positioning itself as number one, I feel like I did enough.
Later on, after achieving his goal, 50 declared himself unavailable to Pop's team and criticized their handling of the rollout. And in his annoyance over the end product, the biggest and most permanent issue with posthumous albums, as both creative works and money-making schemes both come into play. As when you're creating a record as a collective, everyone's going to have their opinion. But unless they left a will, there's simply no way to know for sure what they'd really want. And by suggesting that they do know what's best and prolonging their career, there's a good chance that those in charge won't have entirely honorable motivations for living out someone else's creative dreams. But if you want to be seen as doing right by the artist, a posthumous album should always be the final puzzle piece in a legacy rather than an entirely different branch of their career.